Welcome, everybody. My name is Alison Clay, and I teach here at Simon Fraser University. This is my colleague, Marina Roy, who teaches at UBC. And we are welcoming you. We are your greeters today. First of all, thank you for those of you who've traveled from afar to join us today and to participate either as an audience or as a panelist, moderator. Thank you for traveling all that way. And welcome to Vancouver. Welcome to the kind of day that Vancouverites usually experience. We had a special treat for you yesterday, those of you who were able to be here. And I would like to start and hope that you will join me in respectfully acknowledging that we are gathered here today on unceded Coast Salish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam lands. I have a few housekeeping remarks just at the very beginning before I do any kind of an intro for you. So first of all, I want to apologize, because it's a very Canadian thing to do, to all of the panelists and participants who've had freak-out sessions with typos in our publications. I'm really sorry. We tried our very best all the way along. It's I've never organized a conference of this scale before at a university, and in our grant application, we forgot that maybe it'd be a good idea to have a copy editor. So we were all copy editing, and we even have a German speaker who was able to correct some German text for Isabel. But anyway, we overlooked things, and that's the way it goes. I'm sorry. But we can make corrections as we speak today. And another thing I want to say is watch out for your personal belongings here, because this is a university, but it's very easy to put something down and it will go missing. So you'll see signs everywhere, but I just wanted to give you a double warning. The other thing is that we've been passing out the brochures, and if you don't have one, there's some more on the back table. There also will be invitations to the Vancouver Art Gallery opening on the back table for those of you who don't have one and want to go. If they're not here now, they will be here later in the day. Yeah? They're there. Okay, thank you. Yes, I have a pencil, so if you want me to say anything, I'm going to write it down and I'll say it. So watch out what you tell me to do. Okay, so the schedule today is each panel is an hour and a half long, and we have a 10-minute break in between for changeover. And the symposium ends at 5:15. Poor Marina is really sick, so I'm sorry.
Steer clear of me.
She's even staying away from the microphone for the time being. So closing remarks at 5:15. That's between now and then. I will make note of any comments you'd like me to make for closing remarks. There'll be a cash bar for some quick refreshments between 5:15 and 6:30 before we go to the opening at the Vancouver Art Gallery. And you'll have to buy a ticket to get your drink. And we have ticket sellers. They will be at the back. And then after that, everyone is invited to the opening of the exhibition Entangled, 2 Views on Contemporary Painting. Okay, so refreshments, as you see, stuff is back there. Some of you have imbibed and eaten, and please feel free to help yourself at any moment. That should be around there, at least until they're depleted or at 1 o'clock. Lunchtime is from 1 to 2, and you're on your own for lunch. There is a plethora of eating spots around and available. And if you Google, you can Google gastown.org, restaurants and bars, and there'll be more suggestions there. Some places are fast, some places are slow, some places are good, some places are bad. It's potluck. Okay. Or maybe some kind of luck. So, and so enjoy the neighborhood. It's a lovely, unique neighborhood. Okay. And when I first came to Vancouver, I worked here at Woodward's in the display department. So I find it ironic that I've been back here working again in this building. Okay, so our symposium is made possible with the partnership of the Vancouver Art Gallery and the generous financial contributions from the Goethe Institute, the Emily Carr University of Art and Design, the O'Dane Endowment for Curatorial Studies through the Department of Art History, Visual Art and Theory at the University of British Columbia, the Social Sciences and Humanities Council of Canada, and here at SFU, the Academic Vice President's Office, the Faculty of Communications, Art and Technology, and this is the School for the Contemporary Arts. We're very thankful for all this support. I'd also like to take this time to thank our research assistants, Mai Jensen from SFU and Kyle Schuerman from Emily Carr, who have really actually taken leadership roles in their jobs. And all of our student volunteers, I'm not sure who was volunteering yesterday, but we have volunteers today, and I'm highly appreciative of your time today. So thank you very much. You are the undercurrent and energy and support. We did talk about how the symposium started out yesterday, so I won't dwell on that, but it kind of, we were a group of painters who started meeting together and critiquing each other's works. And we are all teachers. So just maybe I should reiterate, the artists in that group are David McWilliam, Landon McKenzie, Stephanie Aitken, Elizabeth McIntosh, Ben Reeves, Marina Roy, and Alison Clay. Oh, that's me. Okay, so, but you know, after last night's lecture, maybe I'm thinking too much and didn't get enough sleep, but I thought that I should bring a book, because it seems that no discussion on painting can happen without a book or some reference to a tome or theory. So I brought Restless Ambition by Grace Hartigan, and I wanted to say at least one quote from here. Grace Hartigan, bless her heart, probably not a very nice person, but an amazing painter and a very interesting person also. So today I will say that Grace is my Marx, and you can quote me on that, and preferably out of context, so it works better that way. Harold Rosenberg once asked Grace if she had any good ideas lately. And this actually is a book by Kathy Curtis. So Grace Hartigan replied, "Put a paintbrush in my hand and I'll let you know." And I feel that that is an appropriate starting remark for a bunch of painters to talk about painting. I'm going to turn this over to Marina, and thank you.
Hi, can you hear me okay? So this is the other part of the introduction. So based on the fact that that a bunch of painters are getting together about once every 1 or 2 months, a few of us took it upon ourselves to start organizing a symposium. And the members of that group for the symposium were Catherine Dennis, the former Director of Education and Public Programming at the Vancouver Art Gallery. The current director now is Cheyenne Turians, and Bruce Grenville, Senior Curator at the Vancouver Art Gallery, David McWilliam, myself, Alison Clay, and Philip McCrum. So all of us were instrumental in putting our brains together and devising this wonderful event. We garnered a lot of support. I just wanted to reiterate that Alison and I took it upon ourselves to write a SSHRC Connections grant, which we were successful in obtaining. And it was really that grant that allowed us to have the funds to bring in all of our panelists from away and to put them up at a hotel and feed them, well, give them a stipend in any case. Also, it was a great opportunity to do this in conjunction with a lot of painting exhibitions that are on right now. The 2 exhibitions that are on at the Vancouver Art Gallery. And there are other exhibitions I'd like to point out. Philip McCrum and I, we co-curated an exhibition at the Ava Gallery at the O'Dane Art Center at UBC. And some of the participants in that exhibition are here today on the first panel. There's also painting that I think will be at Contemporary Art Gallery. There's some at Equinox, Elan, Fine Art, Katrina Jeffries, Gallery Jones, Republic, Monty Clark, Willa Ballet Art Project. So there are many others too. That Windsor probably has painting too. I haven't seen all the shows, unfortunately, but just wanted to signal that. So there's lots to see in conjunction with our discussion around painting. What else can I say? So yeah, I just want to thank you all for coming today. It's a great crowd for first thing in the morning, and I hope that everyone stays and enjoys themselves. I am going to kind of launch the first panel that Phil McCrum and I, we thought of the people who we wanted to have on it. We kind of gave it the context, which is the diviners, materialists, and creatives. I just did want to kind of do what Alison did, is just quote something and maybe lay a bit of groundwork for what it means to be assembled here today. So it's a quotation from Judith Butler called Notes Towards a Performative Theory of Assembly. I haven't finished reading the book. I'm about halfway through it, but it's a wonderful book on thinking about what it means to be occupying space in different capacities. And this is her. For the point is not that I am a collection of identities, but that I am already an assembly, with even a general assembly or an assemblage. I am not the complexity that I am, and this means that I am related to others in ways that are essential to any invocation of this I. So I decided to start with this because we're all assembled here on this land, and for most of us it isn't our land, and it's a land which has been taken from others, and a land on which we, through great efforts, gain new ground on what it means to live together in non-instrumentalized ways. And I'm hoping that through discussion today, we can find some common ground, as well as taking agonistic positions. I'm grateful that all of you have agreed to come together for this symposium, especially the panelists today, who are contributing their thoughts and ideas, different worldviews, different desires and approaches to expressing meaningfully through paint, thinking through paint, often with a mind to what it feels most urgent in this increasingly precarious world. It would be interesting to think through how paint can't be reduced to its value form as commodity. Isabelle Gras did bring up the fact that there is something about painting that escapes that commodity status, but we didn't get much further than that. This is why we're here, I think, to discuss all of that. And I think I won't continue on anymore. I would like to just pass it on to Carolyn Stockbridge, who will be presenting the first panel.
Thank you.
must have a picture to begin with. Or a painting, excuse me. Picture painting. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Alison and Marina, for your warm introduction, and I thank you both, along with Phil McCrump, for inviting me to participate as a moderator on this panel. I suppose we are the diviners, we are not thieves, even though you have to watch your bags, apparently, around here. Anyway, it's a real treat to be here, so thank you for the invitation. This panel is in conjunction with the exhibition The Diviners at the Art History Visual Art Gallery at the Ordain Arts Centre at UBC, which Marina mentioned, and it's a really good show, so I really welcome everyone to come out and have a look. I also extend a thank you to Isabel Groh, I don't know if Isabel is here, who gave a thought-provoking talk last night at Emily Carr University, which I hope will continue to spark future conversations amongst all of us here and across the city. I'd like to welcome our panelists today, whose work you will see very shortly. Each artist will give roughly a 20-minute presentation on their work, with questions and comments held until after all of the presentations are complete. I will introduce everyone now and then share a couple of thoughts just before presentations begin. Starting with Sean Alward at the end there. Sean is a Vancouver-based artist working in painting and photography. He works at the intersection of materials, geology, natural history, and archaeology. He received his BFA from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design and an MFA from the University of British Columbia. He has exhibited across Canada and most recently at is it pronounced Abel or Abel?
Abale.
Abale. I'm way off, excuse me. I hope Will's not here. Or I hope he is, actually, but it would be lovely if he's here, but that would be a terrible faux pas on my part. Sorry, Sean. The Nanaimo Art Gallery, the Surrey Art Gallery, and Access Gallery. Sean's work is also exhibited in the Diviners exhibition at the Ava Gallery in the Ordain Centre. Please join me in welcoming Sean. I'm going to do everyone's bios. Yeah. Sorry. Athena Papadopoulos is our next panelist. Was born in Toronto and lives and works in London, UK, where she joins us from today. Following her BFA at the University of British Columbia, she completed her MFA at Goldsmiths in London in 2013. Some recent exhibitions include The Smurfette at Emmeline in London, Belladonna's Muse, curated by Samuel Leuenberger, Cura Basement in Roma, Wolf Whistles, Shoot the Lobster in New York, Streams of Warm Impermanence at David Roberts Art Foundation in London, Wild Style, Perez Projects in Berlin, Bloody Life, Herald Street, London, and Natural Instincts at Les Aubins, Lucin. Athena also has work in the exhibition at UBC. I suppose we're the UBCers today as well. Please join me in welcoming Athena. And Derek, directly to my right here, completed his MFA at UBC as well and is currently a PhD candidate in art history from the University of Toronto. For many years, Dunlop's research has explored the political, ethical, and philosophical conditions for contemporary abstraction. He considers painting and drawing as cross and interdisciplinary modes of practice, and his work is deeply engaged with art history. He has been the recipient of numerous grants and awards, including the Helen Pitt Award, the BC Binning Memorial Fellowship, the Andrew McIntosh Memorial Book Prize MFA, and is it Jan or Jan? Do we know?
Jan.
Jan, and the Jan and Adam Waterous Scholarship. His work has been featured in exhibitions across Canada and the US, including at the Drawing Center in New York City and the UCLA New White Gallery in Los Angeles. He has participated in residencies at the ISCP in Brooklyn, the Banff Center, the Riding Mountain Artist Residency, and a medium-specific painting residency with the Golden Foundation. Please join me in welcoming Derek. So very briefly, I'm just going to read a little bit here, just to sort of place us. I think it's important to consider history always, to place ourselves on a comprehensible timeline, to assess where we are right now with some level of social and personal criticality. In doing so, hopefully we are pointed toward the future with a measured integrity based also on current significant circumstances that affect our work. And that effect is going to show up differently with everybody's practice. Each day we are inundated with images and sounds of horror, catastrophes, global genocide, suffering in such magnitude that it is at times difficult to fathom how we can repair the damage. I pose a question to our panelists, which is, do you continue making stuff, in this case paintings and other, in this climate because it is inherently what you know to do? Is it pleasure-based, politically motivated? Can we really make change? I believe that art, particularly painting, has the potential to shift consciousness, not only because of painting's ability to signal and respond, but because painting can shape the imaginations of the invisible while shaking us awake at the very core of humanity, to gain attention to address the perceivable. Painting can generate a power surge through its makers by tapping into the mineral intelligence of paint and painting mediums. I've been looking into divining and its implications in painting, and it would be neglectful of me to not mention Hilma af Klint, whose work is right there, who was a Swedish artist and mystic whose paintings were amongst the first 20th century European abstract art. Af Klint's paintings or diagrams were a visual representation of complex philosophical ideas. She believed that she and her group of 5 that met weekly gained access to and channeled information from a greater source. And that information was directly recorded in her paintings with the use of geometric patterns and specific combinations of color to be considered an offering to heal humanity. Interestingly enough, Af Klint requested that the paintings were not to enter the public domain no less than 20 years after her death. This throws an interesting spin on the value of painting as commodity, as was suggested last night by Isabel Grohr. And it sets up a sort of a holding pattern, which I think is a really interesting thing to talk about because it sets its side outside of anything that's commodity-based, in my opinion. The monetary value, I believe, was not entirely in Af Klint's fantasy exchange, but a varying degree of currency as an agent of change on a slipping timeline, and that is the beautiful currency of painting itself. These are urgent times, and perhaps divining is only one clue along with the taking up of paint and other materials to be able to see ourselves into some other state in the future, or even now. Regardless, we have artists who are very much alive right here and here, making things now with information yet to be uncovered. So on that note, I will turn this over to the first presenter, Sean Alward. See the red dot there. There you go.
Okay, hello and good morning. Whoops. Okay, just give me a second here. Okay, so it's kind of my title, not so important, but I'm going to talk about, basically I'm going to talk about a little bit about my recent work and give it some context, some images that kind of shaped my thinking about painting generally. And so I'm very interested in materiality. Excuse me. My voice is still waking up. And what is the paint? What's it made out of? Where does it come from? These are things I'm interested in. So the first image, I guess, and the second painting of the day that we're looking at. This is a painting that it's kind of been in my head for a long time. I first saw it probably when I was about 12. And I didn't see it. I saw it in the book, so I saw a photograph of it, reproduction. And it's by Albert Pinkham Ryder. I don't know if people are familiar with him or not. Some people. He was painting late 1800s, 1880s, 1890s, early 1900s. Had a big influence on early American modernists, particularly like Marsden Hartley. But there are a couple things about this image that have fascinated me for a long time. Partly the image itself, but also some things that he didn't intend, some things about the materiality of the painting. So it's falling apart. It's in really bad shape, and it's been in bad shape almost since he painted it. He's infamous for his paintings deteriorating almost before they left his studio. So in terms of painting craft, he pretty much ignored it. So in traditional oil painting, so you can see it's cracking apart. That's one of the things that's happening. It's a little hard to tell from this slide, but if you look at the cracks carefully in person, wet paint is oozing out of the cracks. So it's kind of like a geological landscape. So he's painting a landscape, and he's creating kind of like a little landscape. And the early stages of his painting, his work, unintentionally is kind of seeping through this kind of goo. And this goo, when I first saw this as a kid, fascinated me, this goo creeping through the painting unintentionally. And the painting, and the idea of the painting of a landscape also being a kind of landscape. Okay, so in terms of my own work, a lot of it comes from walking outside in the landscape, I guess, and kind of studying, thinking how is the landscape, why does it look the way it does? Reading its history through geology, natural history, and of course the human history built on top, archaeology. So this image, this is a parking lot in Nanaimo. And the big black streak is a streak of coal. So Nanaimo is famous for coal mining. And this is not far from the Nanaimo Art Gallery, just a few blocks away. So in terms of kind of the geology or natural history, the coal was formed about 70 million years ago from basically an ancient swamp or forest. And I'm kind of fascinated, kind of like in the Ryder painting, how you've got this earlier hidden piece of history becomes visible. And in this case, I don't know if it became visible because they made the parking lot or if it was naturally like that, but at any rate, it's visible. So another thing about painting, I like to think of it in terms of time and space. So, we tend to think of painting and images as being two-dimensional, but it's really three-dimensional. All images are actually three-dimensional because they exist in our space. So in that Ryder painting, you've got the little globs of goo coming out, three-dimensional. And it's also referencing the fourth dimension, time, because it's an earlier part of the time process of the painting coming through. And same with this piece of the landscape. It represents, or it's a reminder of time. So, in my own work, I've been taking the coal and basically using it as pigment, grinding it up, mixing it with resin, acrylic resin, and also making watercolor of it, and other pieces. So homemade paint, and making these things, these objects. So this particular one, this is up at UBC right now, and it's called Blossom. And this is also up at UBC. So it's very hard to tell from these slides, but the coal is it's quite bumpy, put on in layers, so it's quite tactile. And the imagery for these particular works. I'm thinking also about fossils a little bit. I started collecting fossils when I was a kid. I'm from Halifax, on the East Coast, and there's an amazing fossil site called Joggins in the Bay of Fundy. And one of the neat things about that site, and this is a fossil from there, the fossils come from the beginning of when the first creatures were coming out of the water. And so they're the earliest land animals, kind of just the beginning of dinosaurs. But it's also an era where it's not that far from before things started to kind of differentiate, before mammals appeared, before birds appeared, but also before plants and animals were different. So this particular fossil, it looks kind of like reptilian, but it's a plant, it's a root. So in terms of, whoops. I was kind of interested in the similarity of plant form and animal form. We're very similar. More sophisticated plants like trees and flowering plants have a stalk and things kind of shoot off from the sides. And we're kind of the same. We've got a spine, we've got ribs, and limbs that shoot off from the sides. We're built the same. We have a similar structure. So there was at some point way back when, in the early goo of life, we're coming from the same source. So I was interested in that. Okay, I'm going to skip this one. Okay, so another material I've been working a lot with is clay. And this is an image of, does anyone know what this is? Yeah, it's where we are. So this is Vancouver, seen from the satellite. Again, it's appearing a little bit dark in this image, but I really love this picture in terms of giving some context as to really where we are. And again, I apologize. I wish it was a little bit lighter and easier to see. But you can, again, in terms of like reading, I see an analogy between reading the landscape and reading paintings in terms of understanding time and space and how they're built up and materials. So in this image, if you look at it from a geological point of view, you can read how this landscape was constructed. So you can kind of see the Fraser River, like a ribbon, this kind of turquoise color going across the image. And then there's kind of this plume. The color is exaggerated a little bit. This kind of plume of turquoise coming out on the far side. So that's the Fraser Delta. And that plume is all the sediment carried by the river. And the sediment is eroding from the mountains. And all of the flat stuff, which is basically Richmond, Delta, all the kind of lighter stuff down there, it's all sediment, and it's all relatively recent. It's only about 10 to 5,000 years old, so it's very recent. So we're kind of watching the landscape making itself here. And again, in terms of, I'll show some images of my work in a moment, but the clay, yeah, kind of metaphorically, the landscape is painting itself. Okay, so here's just some examples of work I'm making using clay, using the same sediment. This one is called Column, and that sediment comes from near Fort Langley, I think. This one's called Liquid Mountains. And most of that's from Wreck Beach, or near Wreck Beach. So, yeah, I'll just move on here, okay. couple more. The top element is a cyanotype photograph. Okay.
Can you go back to that one before?
This one?
Yeah.
So these are about this big. So I'm not going to talk too much about these particular pieces. How much more time do I have?
Let's have a look. Not 10 minutes.
Oh, okay.
5 or 10, whatever you want to do.
Okay. Okay, so another image that's been stuck in my head for a long time and has influenced my thinking about painting and images generally is this one. People recognize this one. This is a fairly familiar image. It's apparently the oldest existing photograph that we have. So it's not the first photograph. There were earlier photographs, but they're gone. This is the oldest one that we know of that we still have. This is the one that's been reproduced. If you go online, it's everywhere, and it's been kind of the iconic one reproduced in texts of photographic history. So it's Nicephore Niepce, view from the window 1826, 26 or 27 in France, or in Gras. So one of the things that fascinates me about it, this was refound in the 1950s by Helmut Gernsheim. He found it in a trunk, I think, in France after about 130 years. And so, I mean, it was a big deal finding this thing. So then they wanted to reproduce it so they could show everybody. And they couldn't reproduce the thing. This is the irony of this first photograph. They were unable to adequately reproduce it for publication to show people that they found this first photograph. So they made a painting. What we're looking at and what gets reproduced as the world's first photograph is about 50% painting. They took a photograph of the photograph, and they thought the quality was so poor and unreproducible that they overpainted it with watercolor. The original picture doesn't look like this. The world's first photo that we look at is half painting. The real photo looks something like this. It's a little image on tin, and it's very difficult to reproduce, as you can see. So before they painted it, I mean, Helmut Gernsheim, he took it to the Kodak lab in New York. He took it to, they couldn't get a satisfactory photo of it. So the irony of that struck me, and the fact that the thing we see is actually half painting is ironic. Okay, and related to that, I mean, this strange relationship of painting and photography, which is inescapable. All the paintings we're looking at today, of course, none of them are paintings. We're looking at photographs. So there's kind of weird back and forth between painting and photography, which I find interesting. Just in terms of how we think of them as categories. And also getting back to the material aspect in terms of the material. So I've been working a lot with materials that are, recently that are reactive. So I was making paint out of clay, which is relatively inert. Coal, which is potentially reactive. You could set it on fire. I don't want my painting set on fire, but. And these ones, this is something that's up at UBC right now. The pigment's made of chlorophyll. It's plant chlorophyll. It's kind of rich green. And it's light sensitive. It's photosensitive. So on the one hand, it's a paint pigment. I'm making paint out of it. But if you take a photo negative and put it on that, you can make a photograph. As you can with any leaf, any leaves on trees, you can make a photograph on a tree leaf. Just put something on it, expose it to sunlight, and you'll get an image. So this is showing, those are some small photographs I made using the same this homemade green paint, basically. And there's a detail of one. But it's kind of interesting. Actually, a large part of the organic world is photosensitive. So, I mean, all plant matter, you can make images on it. Even wood with plywood, you've probably seen, you know, wood ages. You can make prints on wood, your skin. So everything, a lot of the natural world is a photographic surface in a strange way. And it's also a source of pigment for making paint. It's kind of the gooey paint stuff. So I'm interested in this kind of interplay. These are a couple of other things that are up at UBC right now. Should I be finishing soon?
A couple minutes. Good.
So I've been interested in making my own paint and also making my own canvas or support. So this is this piece is called The Dragon in the Woods, and the canvas it's hemp twine glued in these patterns, these kind of twirly patterns, and then I'm coating it in the green chlorophyll paint. So over the course of the exhibition, the green will fade. It's not permanent. There's dim lighting in the gallery, so it'll probably still be green in a month. But if it was in sunlight, it would just completely disappear within 1 or 2 days. It'd be gone. The green would be gone. But the hemp is permanent. Like, it'll last like a super long time. And that's partly just a painting reference I was thinking of, this particular piece. The holes, if you see the real thing, there are holes in the hemp, and so they're kind of like little windows through the picture, and they're coin voids. So I wrapped the hemp around money, and then took the money out.
Thief.
And this is another painting that's been in my head for years and years. I first saw this maybe 20 years ago or more. Just a favorite painting of mine. The real thing is only about this big. It's not very big. St. George and the Dragon, Albert Altdorfer, what's the date? 1510. Just an interesting example of a landscape where it turns into like a planar surface. I mean, traditional European landscape paintings is about kind of a sense of space and a vista. This is like a wall of trees, a wall of green. And the ostensible subject of the painting, St. George and the Dragon, are just those tiny little figures at the bottom. They're almost an afterthought. Or not an afterthought, but they're clearly not really, they're not the main subject. And then it's slightly claustrophobic, and then you've got this kind of void where you can see into the distance a little bit. Gives a little bit of breathing room. I've always been fascinated by the image. Okay, well, maybe I'll wrap it up. I think that's good. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Sean. Thank you, Sean, and welcome, Athena. It's lovely when we remember paintings from childhood or first images that make an imprint in us. They stay with us, and that's one of the powers of painting, I believe. And of course, it would be different for everybody in this room, what that image might be.
I might need help here, actually. So then do I... And then you go over. Maybe you just do it for me that way. I don't have to ruin it somehow. All right. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to thank, before I started, Phil and Marina for inviting me to Vancouver. I haven't been here in about 6 years, so it's kind of crazy and really great to be here and remember all of these little things that I had forgotten passing by certain stores and restaurants. Anyway, I'm really nervous right now because I don't normally do stuff like this, but you guys are all naked to me right now, so I should probably be able to do okay. Okay, so everyone sort of started with quotes. I'm not really one for quotes, but unless I'm sort of like quoting Shakespeare to my beautiful boyfriend, but I'll start with a quote because actually I did have one in my notes, and it is a Baudrillard quote, and I actually don't know where it's from or when, and I'm not even sure if it is a Baudrillard quote, but in any case, so there's apparently a fine line between impassioned celebration and denigration, which is sort of somehow describes my work, but perhaps more crucially my life. But we can talk about that later. Right, so the way I write it and think and work is in fragments, so bear with me a bit, and hopefully you get something out of this. But so I've kind of, this is what you'll be getting right now. So, oh yeah, and I guess I can just kind of click as I go, but I'm not really going to be talking about specific works. I'm just going to be like clicking randomly. So clicking and talking. Okay, so I was thinking about my work as a sort of three-pronged fork, which are slightly like annoying forks to get, but because they don't pick things up as easily, so they're a bit more, complex somehow, but they look nicer, so kind of describes me. Anyway, so there's three prongs. So one is as I imagine, this is sort of like an allegorical way of kind of just talking about the way I approach things. So right, so it's a fork, and so the first prong is materials, and the second prong is process, and the third prong is subject matter, and then the food is the art. So the fork's sort of like holding up the art, and the art's penetrated with these three stakes. And I think the fork's a good allegory because there's like all of these kind of like elements of, or kind of references to sort of digestion, indigestion, and that kind of stuff in the work. So super smart. Anyway, okay. So I actually have more of a sort of tangential relationship to painting. I don't use paint. I use like other materials that are kind of like substitutes for paint. So we're talking about the first prong, the materials, just to get it over with, and then we can talk more about like stuff that doesn't really physically exist, like ideas. Okay, so it's a sort of complex materiality. So I'm using substitutes for paint, such as like cosmetics and medicinal, edible ingredients, Pepto-Bismol, Maalox, Gaviscon, things that you use to treat sort of like overindulgence, and the works are very overindulgent at times, so they need their medicine because, they're so abused from the debauchery that I put them through. And they're stained, the fabrics that I use are stained with like red wine, and then they're bleached back to sort of clean the murder scene, but then they're affected again and stained with like self-tanners and hair dye, nail polish, concealers, foundations, things that create color by staining to transform the body, kind of predominantly marketed towards the female body more often than not, or the metrosexual too. So the way that I kind of like apply these materials is through the like 4 S's, staining, spitting, scrubbing, slapping. So those are sort of and then of course there's cutting and stitching that happens too. And so you'll notice a lot of images or sort of representational imagery. So there are these sort of drawings that are turned into image transfers, or drawings and scenes that I make of women kind of cut out and applied to these sort of fashion textiles, bed sheets, wadding, padding. They're hand stitched and sort of Frankensteinian process to make the perfect beast, or but there's a sentimentality towards Frankenstein, but you're fearful of him because he's big, he's ugly, but actually he's like couture, he's punk. So so yeah, and then another thing I could well, maybe go in the kind of morose direction here, but so dead body paint. Stuff an embalmer might add to a dead body to saturate, enliven, revivify. So there's this scene in Drop Dead Gorgeous, like a favorite teenhood film of mine, where the character, I forget her name, but she's played by Kirsten Dunst, works in a morgue and she's painting dead bodies with these like chemical paints. So the bodies are inanimate objects now because they're dead, but the skin needs to be stained in order to make them look alive again. So anyway, so these are the things that I'm using to sort of enliven my works. And I guess, I think about the materials I use in a sort of Baroque sense, where it's like these things are not supposed to be like these things like that, I guess, like these commodified materials that are marketed towards certain archetypes are sort of like, they're not supposed to be used in that way. So you're sort of pushing something beyond its sort of culturally prescribed use in my case, or its sort of material kind of capacity. Like the hair dye gets resituated, the self-tanner gets mixed with hair and glue and applied to this and that to create ... What else was I thinking? So, yes, and of course it is very, very, the artworks are being affected by these things, because, well, I mean, like for hair dye, for instance, like you change your hair, you change your life, So obviously that, applies in this sense. But we coat ourselves in this shit to be like less sort of stinking chunks of living but dead flesh, and there are these sort of cancerous drugs and products, and then I mix them with like polyester resin, which is smells amazing, and I actually think I'm going kind of bald since I'm losing a lot of hair because I use this, but then I can use that in my work as well, so it sort of saves me like a tiny bit of money. And okay, so we did the quote. Right, so all of these things, these products that I'm using to, I forgot to click, to like dye the works with. So they're sort of things that one would use to sort of doll oneself up, but then I think about this doll as this inanimate, dead object. So, and then somehow I think about plastic surgery as well, which I kind of wanted to be a plastic surgeon when I was really young. I don't know why, but like, yeah, my grandmother thought she was gonna get like quite a lot of freebies. That didn't really work out. But in any case, I'm still like doing a lot of surgery, stitching things, moving like fat where it's kind of more helpful. So it kind of got to be a bit of a plastic surgeon in a way. But, and so then I talk about, right, things like the Baroque thing. So I'm kind of going a bit because my notes are really fragmented. So I was thinking about this Baroque thing where it's like the materials are not supposed to be where, you're using them for, like, in the way that I guess with marble, it was like in the Baroque period, it was like turned into, like, looks like wood, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of, you see it on laptop cases now, like, it looks like marble. It's plastic or something. But, I mean, I don't mean it exactly like that. But anyway, like this Pepto-Bismol thing, which, has a history as a material in art, and as is so many substitutes in paint, like, I mean, of the Viennese actionists, you have like Paul McCarthy, Dieter Roth, they all kind of use these kind of real life materials as sort of substitutes to kind of situate the work the subject matter became more kind of intensified because of the materials that they like the medium is the message or something, but more complex than that, I suppose. But anyway, so I went to buy Pepto-Bismol once in a drugstore, and I needed lots of it, so they said, oh, well, there's a limit, and so I said, well, how much can I get? I mean, I'm not even going to be drinking it. I'm going to be, like, staining things with it. And then they were like, okay, well, we can't sell it to you then. And I was like, why? And they said, because you can't use it for anything other than, like, ingesting it as medicine. And I was like, so you'll let me buy, like, so much if I drink it, but if I just want to pour it on the floor, like, because that's my prerogative, like, that's not allowed. And they're like, precisely. So, like, I mean, in some way, there are these restrictions on these products. They're not supposed to be there. And like, kind of mainstream society tells us, like, that this is what it's prescribed for. And you have to use it in that kind of way. So, in any case, thought that was really annoying. So another thing I was saying, like, in these notes, or that I've written is, so I want to kind of dechlorinate things. I want to, like, let the works stew in their juices. Don't want to sanitize, because if you sanitize something too much, you won't have any antibodies left, and they won't be able to fight. And too clean is not strong. So now we're moving to the second stake of the fork, the process. So, okay, I should be clicking a little bit more, perhaps. Were we there before? Yeah, here, here, here. Good. Okay, so the way I think about my work is in a kind of, like, the process is a sort of like thinking after the act. So sort of in an allegorical way, like, so thinking about the process. So I think about it as a sort of like positive contamination. So I'm infecting the work with multiple viruses of culture, the virus of culture, with a capital K for Kardashian, and the personal. And then I'm abusing and then treating layers of, abusing the works and then treating them. So I'm, like, applying and then removing and then applying again and removing. So it's like this building up of layers. And so you're infecting and you're treating and you're reinfecting, and then it just becomes this untreatable hybrid. It's like a kind of like a drug abuse sort of. But then it's also, I kind of thought of it in a sexual way, and since you're all naked right now, let's just go there. So it's sort of like a Kama Sutra of, like, staving off an orgasm, where you're like, oh, it's almost there, but no, we can't yet, because it will be so much better. You'll have the magnum opus at the end if you just learn to, like, sustain that somehow. So that's sort of like an allegory for, like, how I'm approaching my work as a kind of a body. So stay tuned, because in about 20 years, I'll be having my best work yet. So yeah, just going back to this, the way, like, I'm reading these notes, you know, as you can see, it's very fragmented. The work's kind of fragmented, but it's a downward and sprawling practice. It's not moving toward a point of precision, but it's like a gluttonous celebration of this downward sprawl, lapping. I'm lapping that up, I'm soaking that in, I'm wringing it out perpetually. And everything is rubbing off on each other. The materials are rubbing off on each other, so you'll see, like, you know, things kind of reoccurring, images reoccurring, but the actual kind of form is different. What else do I want to say? So everything's being sort of recombined, resampled, recollaged, and being fused together with all of the different approaches that I'm kind of discovering as I make things, really. And so that's what I mean by the positive sort of contamination. And things are sort of sublimating, and they're changing states. It's like a digging deeper to get to the surface somehow. And it's like a sort of process of covering and revealing and concealing. The kind of feels like, you know, you go through these periods of extreme confidence, I mean, the work goes through these periods of extreme confidence that manifests in a kind of borderline exhibitionism with this, but at the same time, there's this sort of debilitating doubt resulting in a sort of profound covering up of oneself. And I think that's how the materials are sort of functioning. It's like a woman wears makeup because she, on the one hand, perhaps because she feels like, oh, we're going out tonight, let's like have fun, let's like be amazing, be divine. Or she might wear it, you know, because she's trying to cover something up, because she's self-conscious, because she wants to look better, because she doesn't want to be seen somehow. So that's how the works are functioning, I think, in a sense. But yeah, so I'm sort of like collaging stuff from the real world, my personal world, literary references, pop cultural, using like a pop cultural vernacular, and I'm looking at like writers like Kathy Acker, who are sort of re-envisioning and stealing and recombining, but they're at the core of it, it's like a sort of fundamentally kind of autobiographical kind of pursuit, but like it's like a remaking somehow. I also have down here, where is there a Rocky Mountain chocolate factory? They make these it's really gone. Good. Oh. Yeah. Oops. Right. So now we're at the last prong, the subject matter. So just like something I'm really interested in the work, which you kind of see here, there's like text and stuff, like drawings of text, or these sort of slippages in language or slanguage, like reconstructing, transforming the autobiographical elements with pop culture and recreating these kind of archetypes with all of that stuff in there. So, I mean, I think this is a sort of, it's like, okay, so I'm fascinated by slang, urban dictionary terms, cat calling, wolf whistling. So I have a friend from New Jersey, and he said this thing like, yeah, just a bunch of slam pigs. And I was like, what is a slam pig? And he's like, you know, it's a girl that you take home who's quite disgusting, but you sleep with her anyway. He's like, that's one I haven't heard before. But in any case, I'm sort of fascinated by these terminologies that have some kind of animal reference or any word that kind of describes a woman, like a Smurfette. She's kind of the girl, you know, the only one Smurf who, there's only one female Smurf for the most part. So and there's a whole colony of Smurfs. So like, she's obviously the village bicycle. So yeah, kids. So anyway, but then there's all these other terms like that have some kind of animal reference. Some like, you know, there's in Britain, it's like hen party is like a bachelorette party. So, you know, it presumes that the women are chickens or whatever, hens. And then there's like, you call a girl your chick, or you call a girl your like bird. So this is kind of fascinating to me. But they're derogatory words that describe women. They're oppressive and they're misogynistic. But I sort of like, I wanted to somehow like reclaim that and make these like, so like these are now birds, these are now chicks, these are now hens, these are now Smurfettes. The works are, you know, so it's like repurposing that word and somehow redeeming it. I mean, but ultimately, I mean, I'm transforming that through these kind of incongruous additives, these different things, but I'm using the word as a sort of point of departure. And I mean, but I mean, ultimately the works are sort of, they end up as these kind of like grotesque things. So slam pig, I was just thinking like, and then there's Miss Piggy, who's like this needy and vain, sexually gluttonous figure. So all of these like depictions are sort of offensive but then there can be these other, there can be like these animal references to women that are like empowering, like the goddess Artemis. Is she half horse? Am I wrong? Wait, who's the goddess? Artemis. She's got like a bow and arrow and she's half horse. Oh, or Medusa. No, she's got snakes in her hair.
Snakes, yeah. She's snaky.
Yeah, so she turns men to stone. She's a stone cold bitch, but I don't mind that. She's kind of powerful in that sense, and she's turning these hot men to stone to preserve them, so they become hard as a rock, so there's no Viagra needed. Also, I discovered about the birth control pill, which I was taking for 10 years. I discovered that it's pig hormones, so I was like, so I guess I'm a pig now too, right? That's what I mean by there's these like kind of biographical images processed against these kind of this cultural material that's kind of homogenized. So yeah, recreating the world in a kind of hybridized, like highly subjective form. What else do I want to say?
Maybe wrap up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so these are the Smurfettes, and yeah. What would it be like to be one of these women?
Good shoes.
Always.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I feel like I need a cigarette and I don't even smoke. So, welcome, Derek.
Do you need technical?
There's something.
Technical.
Because it's pushed over to the side, right? It's great. Very rock and roll.
Right, I'm going to be reading a paper for my presentation, and I'm also starting with a quote. So I'll start my talk with a quote by Heather Love from her book, Feeling Backwards. Quote, "For groups constituted by historical injury, the challenge is to engage with the past without being destroyed by it. Sometimes it seems it would be better to move on, to let, as Marx wrote, the dead bury the dead. But it is the damaging aspects of the past that tend to stay with us, and the desire to forget may itself be a symptom of haunting." And she concludes, "The dead can bury the dead all day long and still not be done." So this concept of haunting is something that I will expand upon in my talk. So my research and work has been concerned with complicating and destabilizing the relationship between theory and studio practice. I turned to a studio practice of painting on canvas about 7 years ago in order to work through some lingering theoretical concerns or stumbling blocks that were preventing me from moving forward. The ways that I wanted to move theory forward demanded a material exploration that found form in paint and process. Questions involving the relationship between structures and experience, insides and outsides, relationships or originalities, copies, and touching. Very simply, I became concerned with how abstract material processes might be able to contribute something new or different to contemporary discussions dealing with identity. How might the process of paintings becoming paintings reveal something unique about the process of subjects becoming subjects? So I became interested in claiming a tradition of queer abstraction that emerged sometime in the middle of the 20th century. So my desire to return to this earlier moment in painting can be explained through multiple perspectives. Partly it was the result of a kind of queer longing that Heather Love has theorized. Partly it was motivated by my desire to return to what Boris Groys might call the weak image. But mostly I was motivated by my desire to work through these persistent minor feelings, nagging thoughts and uneasy tensions that were making themselves known. I was experiencing what Avery Gordon might describe as a kind of haunting. Gordon explains haunting as an animated state, quote, in which a repressed or unresolved social violence is making itself known, sometimes very directly, sometimes obliquely, those singular and yet repetitive instances when home becomes unfamiliar, when your bearings on the world lose direction, when the over and done with comes alive. She goes on to further describe the psychology of haunting. Haunting always registers the harm inflicted or the loss sustained by a social violence done in the past or being done in the present, and is for this reason quite frightening. But haunting, unlike trauma, by contrast, is distinctive for producing a something to be done, end quote. The something to be done for me took the form of a specifically situated practice of painting. I wasn't particularly interested in pushing the medium of painting forward, and I certainly wasn't interested in pushing the discipline of art forward. I was interested in locating minor cracks in this earlier tradition and creating new work that might speak to them, responding in new ways to old works. So using structures to create openings, limitations to enable boundlessness, and divorcing textures from colors, my process involves the mediation of gestures as a primary mode of making. I start each painting with an abstract impression or by pulling acrylic through rudimentary stencils. I allow texture to pile up, sometimes scrape it away, and then use contradictory methods to reapply it, creating processes in order to activate chance and accident. On top of this rough underpainting, I apply oil, sometimes as gestural stains and sometimes by forcing it into mechanical lines that sit on top of the canvas. Lines of oil applied on top of improvised marks or lines on top of other lines. This way of working forces you to look between the lines and creates a kind of liminal space. The absent body and impersonality became guideposts that directed me to the found image of the square. A found image from art history that could be equally about nothing and about everything simultaneously. I painted a square or a painting of a square over and over again, each time finding new ways of claiming it as my own. The square, when isolated from the rectangular shape of the canvas, becomes a space that is both inside and outside, surplus, excess, and residue. Sometimes it is raised, sitting on top of the canvas, a surface on top of a surface, and sometimes this excess is raised, a long rectangular ridge. The square marks a border and an edge and gives a false sense of a boundary that the fluidity of oil betrays and that pigments accentuate and cling to. The square, when isolated from the rectangular shape of the canvas, always leaves something out, or it gives the impression of keeping everything in. It creates a remainder, a leftover. Leftovers that might mark a possibility, but also leftovers that the painting has no use for, leftovers that still need to be dealt with in some way. The color bar, or squares of color in a row. Small stained squares, squares within squares, a spectrum, color dispersion, refraction, unlikely neighbors, an edge on the edge of the canvas, leftovers, edges, and stains. I use handmade oils which differ greatly from machine-made, industrially produced oils. Each color maintains a shape, a pigment load, a sheen, viscosity, and a translucency that is unique. The size of each tiny particle of pigment varies depending on how it responds to the binder in order to best bring out the color. When mixing these intelligent colors, pigments respond to each other in unexpected ways. There is a vitality. Colors can animate or deflate each other, and I pit one against another. When using secondary colors to mix shades of gray, the opposite pigments stubbornly hold on to their original texture or grittiness. This kind of mixing is unique and performs absence and presence at the same time, refusing one or the other. Effacement as a concept and as a tool for painting speaks to a queer poetics. It can be effacement as inscription, as Jella Mansour describes in detail with regard to the paintings of Agnes Martin, and it can also be effacement as a queer relationship to being. To find visibility in invisibility, to use the language of the dead to speak with the dead, conjuring the dead by mixing, staining, covering, removing, and reapplying. Touching the paint and mixing the colors with my fingers, my gestures of mixing become the compositions of paintings. Mixing as composition, finger painting, painting with my hands and feeling the paint in my hands. Jean-Luc Nancy has argued that there's an aspect to touch that is always defined by self-touching. Quote, touch, inasmuch as it is a sense, and consequently, inasmuch as it feels feeling, or more than that, inasmuch as it feels itself, feeling itself, since it only touches by touching also itself, presents the proper moment of sensuous exteriority. Paint has a way of provoking and eliminating the sensuous exteriority. Paint records, imprints, and traces touch. Sensuous exteriority and the materiality of paint, touching and being touched by my materials. I'm also interested in this quote by Nuncy for how we might think about touch as self-touching in relationship to questions of sameness. Sameness as opposed to difference, which is one of the clear indications of queer subjectivity. So these paintings were produced in the peripheral city of Winnipeg, a city that is not known for painting and where abstraction is not really talked about. The city has a special kind of white and yellow light that articulates the passage of time as much as the freezing, thawing, and flooding of the seasons, the whiteouts, and the silence of the deep space. Deep space which rubs up against shallow space and is easily blocked by obstructions. They were painted in a city that may not count as contemporary, a city where ghosts are still allowed to wander the streets and inside the buildings, where the fossils of ancient microorganisms are embedded in the limestone used in the construction of so many of its institutions. Just a few months ago, David Getze published an essay about queer formalism called Queer Relations. In it, he says, quote, "There is nothing intrinsically queer about a form, rather, queer capacities are engendered by activating relations between forms against an opposition or context, or in the case of complex forms, among the internal dynamics of their components. Relationality, or end quote, relationality is a key dynamic to painting, partly due to the complexity of signs that painting can engage with in an incredibly small surface area, and partly due to the way in which painting recalls a tradition, a knowledge, and a history." Getze continues, "An attention to the queer dynamics of form allows us to investigate how form can be mobilized in relationship to content as a way of fostering such queer tactics of subversion, infiltration, refusal, or the declaration of unauthorized allegiances. We shouldn't think of formalism as a turning away from content or context, but rather as the focused pursuit of queer potential through the questioning of how content is shaped, transmitted, coded, patterned, undermined, and invested by means of form." With this in mind, the forms that I'm painting are forms and also not just forms, squares and not just squares. They are recognizable and also not recognizable. Different narratives are set in motion depending on context, the relationship between paintings and other paintings, paintings and drawings, and paintings and sculptures. Each work functions independently, but their content is enlarged when placed in relation. The desire to explore representation through abstraction in and of itself points away towards imagining subjectivity beyond enforced confessional forms of identity. Confessional forms of identity which are always exposed to regulation and condemnation. Liminality as a form and imagined as an action has the potential to animate a unique kind of political reality. Abstraction can be an ethical refusal against the policing of non-normative subjectivity. In his essay, Empathy and Abstraction, Doug Ashford argues, quote, "Abstraction is often understood as a purposefully limited relation between humans and their ideals, cutting our sense of things in order to approach their complexity without a full description, disdaining legibility to open richer, multiple readings." He continues, It is as if abstract imagination seeks to allow something lost or something too big to see at once to creep into our daily vision. The strange thing is that when this happens successfully, we do more than see differently, we feel differently. End quote. In the process of feeling differently, Ashford believes that there is the potential to a reimagined social invention. He notes, as the forms of actual life are forced to filter through ideal projections of abstraction, life can be repositioned, moving our concepts and our bodies into contexts of self-design. This suggests a possibility of creating a distinction between the emotions that are designed for us by the world of power and domination and new feelings that can be built independently. End quote. So painting has this unique ability to register and record the process of independent self-design. It has the potential to open up new ways of being in relation to each other beyond accepted and restricted categories of identity. Painting demands empathy and patience, and it demands an openness from the viewer. By occupying multiple temporalities instantaneously, painting can claim, recall, and activate a tradition within a single mark or a single color. In the introduction to Cruising Utopia, Jose Esteban Minaz states, quote, "We have never been queer, yet queerness exists as an ideality that can be distilled from the past and used to imagine a future. The future is queerness's domain. Queerness is a structuring and educated mode of desiring that allows us to see and feel beyond the quagmire of the present." End quotes. So my work is engaged with the representation of a queer aesthetic space, talking back to ghosts and working through traditions of modernity, perhaps as a way to arrive in the contemporary. It explores bounded and boundlessness as key relations for addressing our effective relationship or our effective experiences with others and the world around us. It is marked by a refusal to conform to confessional forms of identity and might also describe a practice of queer sovereignty. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Apparently, there is a future. We have a future, which is how we opened our discussion as painting, as well as all things discussed here, laying out a line, a trajectory line that, to me at this moment, feels quite promising, I have to say. Thank you all very much for your wonderful presentations. And I just, I don't even know if I can read my notes at this point. I was so excited by the discussion of materials and intellect and theory coming together on the surface for us to unite in our differences, but also with a similarity, which is the undercurrent of the language of painting itself. I'm also taken with immediate similarities here where, there are holes. Visually there are holes here, or circles. Literally punching out or punching into a historical narrative that needs to be punched at so that it can be redefined and reassessed so that we can make new meaning and move forward. Athena, I have a question about the disembodied legs.
Right.
They're incredibly...
Right. Wait, does this work? Can you
hear Athena?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello?
I find them incredibly distressing. It's like they want to leak, but they're incredibly self-contained.
Mm-hmm.
They're definitely, about embodying the disembodied body, if that even makes any sense. And also because of the colors that you're using, I immediately think of, I don't know if you would want to go with this reference, but I immediately think of Philip Guston's painting of the piled-on legs. Everybody know that work? Mm-hmm. And his use of pink that he really took up and marched forward with. And that painting in particular was in reference to his brother who was in an accident and lost his legs. Yeah. And you mentioned something yesterday in the talk. Athena gave a talk at UBC yesterday. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so I guess what I can say about that is, like with all of my works that, actually not all of them, but some of the earlier works for sure, sort of use these kind of autobiographical reference as a point of departure. So that leg kind of came about because when I was like a child, I would have to visit the hospital every day, or actually every other day, to be fair, with my mother and my sisters to visit my grandmother, my mother's mother, and she had had both of her legs amputated from diabetes. So because she led quite like a kind of overindulgent life and had like many different kind of men throughout her life. And in the hospital, we would bring her like cigarettes and these these chocolates that have a cherry inside of them. Do you know those? They're like kind of old school. I've only ever seen them in Canada, but anyway, we would like always bring her a pack of Export A's, like a bottle of wine or some kind of like small Mickey of alcohol, and then these cherry candies. And so it was like kind of like quite a haunting going to her experience. And I was always kind of, I was always kind of preoccupied with that somehow. I mean, she died. I mean, I had a lot of guilt about it because they called my house and it was the hospital and I didn't want to go, so I didn't tell my mom that the hospital had called and she was like dying. So
Whoops.
Whoops. But yeah, but I was like a kid, you know, I was like 10 or maybe 9 or something. But anyway, like I kind of like, so these legs kind of haunted me, and so they were like a form that, like, it's funny that you mentioned the brother with the legs. I didn't know about that actually. And so I wanted to kind of like I was talking about, give them like a new life, like, well, what happened to those legs, you know, like, so I wanted them to kind of like walk the earth again, but with like their sexy Louboutin and kind of like reclaiming that kind of really depressing situation somehow. So it's so funny, I love that quote that you said in the beginning about the sort of like the kind of haunting and the it was a good quote, you know, but I was like, yeah, I totally get that. But yeah, so I mean, that was one of the earliest kind of sculptural works I did outside of kind of academic environment, and it's kind of grown in a different way, and it's become more of a, I wouldn't want to reduce it to like a motif, but it's kind of like found a new life in different ways, in different works, and becomes a frame, and then it becomes like a, you know, this long log that you can sit on and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, there's a sentimentality and also a sort of dangerous element to them, and it's and again, it's like I think they want to leak. I think Athena's work leaks all over the place, but it's so well contained at the same time. So I'm really drawn to that. And then talking of the haunting, you know, I think that images do haunt us, as we said before. I mean, in Sean's introduction, the first image that he showed us was an image he saw as a child, and it resonated with him and it stayed with him, and it certainly looks like it defines, got my F and V mixed up there. It defines a specific nature in your work. And then the last image that you showed was, you know, the landscape work, and you talked also about walking through the landscape now to find and locate your materials, which in essence is a traditional form of divining, right? People would walk through an open field with dowsing sticks. In the old country, in England, there used to be bits of wood. Now they're copper. And you walk slowly through a field with these, you know, 2 sticks like this, loosely pinched within forefinger and thumb. And as you come across an underlying stream, something that is invisible, because we're talking about energy here and things that are not seen that are made visible, one's 2 sticks do this, they cross over. And guaranteed you have found, you know, where you're going to create your well, basically, or you have found water or minerals. So Sean, you know, you talked about the coal in Nanaimo, and now you've given away your source. I'm going to be going on a ferry over there very soon. How did you locate that? And also specifically, more to that point, is do you feel, and everybody can talk about this, do you feel that the materials call you, or do you go in search for specific materials to make stuff with?
Okay, well, I went to Nanaimo because I knew there was coal there.
Okay.
And I wanted coal because it's black. And it's made out of plants. And it's really old. So I wanted all of those things. Nanaimo's not the first place I went. There's coal here. There's coal underground, right under this room. Obviously, it's difficult to get here. But Coal Harbor, just down, it's named that for a reason. There's coal other places in town. I won't reveal where they are, but there is it's possible to get coal within about 15 minutes of here. And some of my other work is using that coal. So in terms of the material calling me or why I'm picking certain things, I'm trying, at the moment, I'm trying to make paint, so I'm choosing clay because it's a fine grain. But I also want to see if I don't, I'm interested in the specificity of where we are. So if the place kind of paints itself, meaning what the stuff that actually comes from here, what does it actually look like? So if you go to the paint store, you've got all these colors, but they're not connected to here. They're kind of, you can go to the same paint store in Pittsburgh or Amsterdam. But if you're getting stuff that's literally from here, what does the painting look like? So it's kind of, it started as kind of an experiment. What would a painting look like made from here? Not our idea of here. I mean, the idea of a Vancouver or BC painting is, kind of dusky greens and misty grays and things like that. Reproducing kind of the way things look. But if you're actually using the material that you can find here, what would it look like? I didn't know. Like, I didn't know what would the clays look like? What kind of clays can I find? So that's how it started. It was an experiment, basically.
That's great. So it's like our materials actually locate us not only geographically, but within the boundaries of our work as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think, Athena, you could say the same also with the use of Pepto-Bismol. It's. I don't think you can get it here, can you? Yeah. Oh, you can? Oh, excuse me. It's just crossed the ocean. But I'm going to get to you in a sec there. But I just also wanted to make mention also of, there's always repetition in history and new discoveries through materials and how we use them and our approaches to them are informed by, what is going on personally within us, in our lives, whatever struggles we have and whatever is happening on the exterior. What I really find really cheeky about Pepto-Bismol, if I might say, is that even though there are clear references to historical art figures in your work, I've already mentioned Guston, Hannah Wilkie comes up in the bubblegum, sculptures, the repetitive bubblegum sculptures of female anatomy. Cecily Brown comes to mind as, the British painter. But what I like about Pepto-Bismol is that you mentioned it's to settle the stomach. So I'm making a comment here. I find that you're not actually regurgitating the past necessarily.
Right.
And Pepto-Bismol is a sedative or a sedating material to bring your work into a sense of containment.
Yeah.
Right? Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
What's in Pepto-Bismol? Like, what's it made out of?
Athena might know. It's a gorgeous color pink, but I don't know what's in there. It's dangerous.
Roses.
Roses. Roses and cream.
Hydrochloride. What is in it? Some stuff.
Chalk. Yeah, there's chalk. Yeah.
That's
chalk.
a pigment.
It's a pigment.
It's also, yeah.
Yeah, it's a pigment.
Calcium carbonate.
Okay. Yeah.
Mint flavor.
Oh, that's new. Okay. And so we're haunted. We're constantly haunted by the past, by images we've seen, by experiences, by our materials. There's a constant repetition even in our daily practice of going to the studio, opening the door, closing the door. You get to work, you set yourself up, and then there's a repetition of gestural mark making. And there is a haunting there, Derek, and I'm coming here to you at this moment. I find, looking at your work, there's such a sincere mark making and obvious repetition in mark making. There's something very pastoral in there as well that you're covering up, it feels to me. But there's such a tender gesture, which really reminds me of Agnes Martin and also that you mentioned. Agnes Martin's beautiful soft palpations of color on top of floating graphite lines that create a space. We all know Agnes Martin. But I want to ask you about haunting. Do you really believe in the ghost? How does the ghost, where's the ghost located? And does the ghost care about what you're doing?
That's a good question. Like maybe I just start with that Avery Gordon's a sociologist, and so she's using it, haunting, in a very specific way, and I'm sort of appropriating her use of haunting to talk about like a sort of psychological state that I was going through that turned me onto painting on canvas. In ghosts, I think that I probably do believe in ghosts, and I'm not sure if, I can't speak for ghosts, so it's hard to say if they care whether or not that I'm thinking about speaking to them.
Yeah, maybe to be more specific, I think that, I mean, I don't know, but I think the ghost can also be, again, how over time one would come to the same picture or painting as Sean does, as we all do. We have favorite pictures and paintings in our lives, and we constantly revisit these things. It's part, I believe, part of the gesture of actually making a mark. It's inclusive in that because we're formed by habit, right? We're formed by echoes of things that came before, and I believe that we project those echoes into the future. And so I think I talked about a timeline, with Hilma af Klint, who said, you can't show this work until 20 years after my death. In fact, it turned out to be 40 years after her death. In the 80s at LACMA in Los Angeles, when there was a show on spirituality and abstract art, which is the first time her paintings were shown. And so it it does this wonderful twist on, perhaps we're the ghost already, perhaps we're already in that position. Perhaps we're working alongside our other self.
Have you seen the movie Personal Shopper with Kristen Stewart?
I haven't seen it yet.
Well, it has the Hilla as a reference in it, and then she's looking for her twin brother who has died. So she's trying to contact him in this film, but there's also these kind of references to Hilla.
That's great.
And haunting. And then I had this dream the other day, which was super scary. It was I was in my bed, and I thought I was awake. I thought I was asleep, and then I felt I thought I was sleeping on my arm, and your arm falls asleep. But then I was tapping myself really hard, and I thought, oh, the reason I can't feel that is because my arm's asleep, so it would feel like someone else's arm. And then I turned around, and it was Kristen Stewart, and she was grabbing me. And then I choked her to death. And it was the weirdest thing ever. But then I woke up and I was in the exact same place, and I turned around and she wasn't there anymore. Weird, right?
Yes, that's a good one. Wow.
I was just going to say that there's something about Gordon's use of haunting in terms of it being a social violence that makes itself known. And I think I talked about it in terms of a people who've been historically violated somehow. So there's sort of, I think it's just important to think of it, the way I'm using it and the way I'm thinking about it, I think is different. Or how I want to think about it, because it's about, a people that aren't able to move forward because they're haunted by this, which is also how their love, or the quote is talking about. I mean, her project is looking at the past and queer suffering, and what that past does for people in the present, and how you find ways of moving forward. So it's not just about ghosts or feeling haunted. It's a political reality. It's a political experience.
Yeah. Well, I should have been a little clearer. When I talk of the ghost, I mean it can be economical, it can be political, obviously, is what you're talking about. And so then haunting can also be discussed as a device, right?
Or you think a bit about Felix Gonzalez Torres's work with the kind of the partner in the bed who's there. So there's that image, and these kind of immaterial kind traces somehow. Oh, I was just saying I mean, I don't really have that. It's not really a complete thought, but I was just thinking about like Felix Gonzalez Torres's work, and I don't know if you like think about that in any sense towards this like idea of haunting. But of course, that goes back to the personal, with the kind of like his partner dying in the AIDS crisis, and how he kind of manifested that idea of haunting in like quite a sentimental way in his work. And then I think Louise Bourgeois talks about it as well, about like ridding, being kind of consumed by the past, and through kind of these manifesting this kind of experience or these things that have haunted her or sort of traumatized her, she's like able to, by putting them somehow in her work in some sort of like way, not so overtly or anything, but the spider as the mother and ... she's able to kind of move on, so that's why I kind of really like that quote that you used, because it's somehow it relates to the making of art, at least from my subjective like interest, hence my two references.
Would you mind reading that quote again? We've referenced it and have not actually said it again.
So it's again Heather Love from her book Feeling Backwards, and it goes like this, quote, "For groups constituted by historical injury, the challenge is to engage with the past without being destroyed by it. Sometimes it seems it would be better to move on, to let, as Marx wrote, the dead bury the dead. But it is the damaging aspects of the past that tend to stay with us, and the desire to forget may itself be a symptom of haunting. The dead can bury the dead all day long and still not be done."
We have, thank you, Derek. We have roughly 5 minutes, I believe. Are there any questions? I've taken up a lot of time. Are there any questions for our panelists or comments? Alison? Do we have a microphone? Sorry, I should have done that earlier.
Hi. Oh, does it work?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, just Sean. In a way, being an artist is kind of an urban thing. You're an urban artist. Can you talk about how you're reaching down beyond the pavement, under it, outside of it? What that is, working as an artist in Vancouver? I know it's not a really well-described question, but it's a half-thought. Thank you.
I think part of my interest in walking around and exploring, looking for pigments and kind of researching histories in the landscape. I mean, we're in a city, but we're in the landscape, and especially in Vancouver, the non-city's not that far away. You just have to look to the North Shore. And if you go there and walk into the mountains, you're really away from the city. But the landscape is here, it's under us, so it's kind of like a veneer of buildings and history on top. But so I don't see a strong separation between urban and non-urban. One of the great things about cities, though, in terms of history, and this seems to be something we're talking about here with ghosts and haunting, that's an aspect of haunting in particular is like an emotional, maybe one aspect of addressing history. And that's something I'm interested in. And I think it's interesting in relation to painting, because painting and history, they're very, very closely entwined, and traditionally, excuse me, even history painting was considered, in the old academy, it was kind of like, this is the highest thing that painting can aspire to, is addressing these larger issues of time and memory and things like that. And I think that, so that goal or aspiration for painting, I don't think it's gone away. I still think that that's one of the highest things that it can address, and it seems like this is coming up directly or indirectly. So for my work, in the city and the landscape, it's another way of dealing with these things, history, and painting for me is a good medium for bringing it together, I guess.
So everybody also, we'd love another question, but just to fill in while somebody else might want to take one more question, maybe?
Well, it's probably bad that I put some on the panel, but
One in the back.
But I just want to mention that, there's sort of like a political deviation away from using traditional mediums and materials, but deviating from their original intention, right, and their job description. And Derek, you mentioned using handmade materials. Are you making those?
No.
No. But you're using handmade materials.
Yeah, they're made in a specific way.
Yeah, they look like Williamsburg.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, another question, please. Yep.
Hi, this is a question for Derek and perhaps the other panelists as well. So last night, Isabel spoke at length about painting as a type of vitalist projection, and I'm wondering whether your concept of a queering of painting is a type of non-vitalist projection, if it's a vision of painting as a form of, or a type of negativity. And because sometimes you oscillate between speaking about color in its vitalist forms, but then at other moments you kind of, I guess, tarry within the negative of painting and painting's history.
Well, I think that I'm sure that my project is a vitalist projection. I think that when I'm engaging with the pigments, though, they do things that are unique that you have no control over. And especially when you're using the handmade oils, the binder, or the pigments in the binder, they're just very unusual. So different things happen. So there's like a vitality to using the paint. I think, obviously the way that I'm using my subject matter is a projection onto the paintings, but I think that's sort of the interesting thing about painting.
Or it's a working relationship, right, with your materials. And there is a bond working through the relationship through years of practice. You do create a bond, a relationship with those materials. So there is a life force exchange with those materials. And yeah, sometimes we're paying attention and sometimes not, and they go wonky, which can be also a very good thing. Yeah. I think that's it for us. I think we're at our time, so thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right on the nose.